In April 2020, as remote work adoption surged across hundreds of enterprises overnight, a collaboration platform's autoscaling system did exactly what it was designed to do. Traffic tripled. The system launched new application servers to absorb the load. Each new server, on startup, opened a pool of connections to the primary database. The database had a connection ceiling fixed by its instance type, a number that did not scale when the application tier scaled. As the cluster grew from 12 servers to 36, the connection pool filled. At 38 servers, the last available connection was claimed. Queued requests began timing out. The application started returning errors. The autoscaling system, interpreting the errors as evidence of insufficient capacity, launched more servers. Each new server arrived, requesting database connections that no longer existed. Rate limits produce immediate, clean signals. When a rate limit is exceeded, the service returns an error on that specific request. The error is immediate, it is visible in monitoring, and it points with reasonable directness at its own cause. A team that sees a spike in 429 errors knows to look at their request rate. Exhaustion is different, and the difference matters for how it is diagnosed, how it is monitored, and how it is recovered from. A resource pool depletes gradually, over a period that may span minutes or hours, with no error signal during the depletion phase, only rising latency as requests queue for a resource that is becoming increasingly scarce. By the time the first hard failures appear, the pool has often been under pressure for a significant period. The complete failure arrives suddenly from a monitoring perspective, because the last available unit of the shared resource was consumed at a specific moment, and every request waiting for that resource failed at that moment simultaneously. The monitoring dashboard shows a spike in errors that looks instantaneous. The depletion that caused it was not. Two characteristics make exhaustion particularly difficult to manage. The first is attribution. The early signals of depletion, rising latency, occasional timeouts, resemble many other problems: a slow network, a degraded dependency, a recent code deployment that introduced inefficiency. Teams investigating rising latency rarely look at resource pool consumption levels as their first diagnostic step. By the time the correct hypothesis is reached, the pool is empty. The second is the feedback loop. Systems designed to self-heal, autoscaling groups, restart policies, load balancers redistributing traffic to healthy instances frequently respond to the symptoms of exhaustion in ways that worsen the exhaustion itself. More application instances means more connection requests. More restarts means more startup time resource allocations. The healing mechanism and the resource consumption are coupled, and the coupling is rarely accounted for in the design of the autoscaling policy. Think about a restaurant kitchen running out of a critical ingredient during a busy dinner service. The kitchen begins the night with a full supply of the sauce that accompanies its most popular dish. For the first hour, orders arrive, the sauce is used, and the kitchen operates without any problem visible to anyone in the front of house. Servers take orders, diners wait, plates arrive. As the evening continues and orders keep coming, the sauce supply decreases. This decrease is invisible to the servers, the hosts, and the diners. The kitchen continues accepting orders. The dish remains listed as available. Everything appears normal. At some point during the service, a cook reaches for the sauce and finds the container empty, not running low, empty. At that moment, every pending order for that dish fails simultaneously. Tables that ordered it are now waiting for food that cannot arrive. Servers, not yet aware the kitchen is out of sauce, continue seating new diners and accepting new orders from tables that have not been told the dish is unavailable. The problem deepens not through any new failure, but through the lag between the resource being exhausted and every affected process receiving that information. Cloud resource exhaustion follows this sequence. The pool fills gradually. The depletion is invisible to external monitoring until latency signals appear. At the moment of complete depletion, Every request waiting for a resource fails at once, not because anything new went wrong, but because the last available unit was consumed. The failure looks instantaneous from outside. The build-up that caused it was not. The analogy breaks at one important point worth naming. A restaurant that runs out of sauce does not have an automatic system that responds to the problem by seating more diners and accepting more orders. Cloud autoscaling systems do. The self-healing mechanism and the exhaustion are coupled in a way the kitchen does not model. And that coupling is one of the defining characteristics of how exhaustion behaves in production environments that use horizontal scaling. Resource exhaustion occurs when every unit of a finite, shared asset has been allocated and no unit remains for new requests. The 5 forms most commonly encountered in cloud applications share the same structural pattern: gradual depletion, invisible early stage, sudden total failure, but each manifests through a different mechanism and produces different diagnostic signals. Connection pool exhaustion is the most frequently encountered form. Every database system has a ceiling on the number of simultaneous connections it will accept, determined by the instance type, by explicit configuration, or by both. An application that runs 10 instances, each holding a pool of 5 database connections, consumes 50 connections. The same application scaled to 100 instances during a traffic event attempts to consume 500. If the database ceiling is 400, the 100th instance cannot complete its connection setup. Requests route to it, find no available connection, queue, and timeout. The error that reaches application monitoring is a timeout message, not a connection limit message, which is why connection pool exhaustion is consistently misattributed in its early stages to network issues or slow database queries. Thread and worker pool exhaustion has a different profile. When all available worker threads in an application process are occupied, waiting on slow downstream responses, processing long-running jobs, or blocked on I/O operations, new requests cannot be assigned a thread and must queue instead. The application accepts the connection but processes nothing. Latency climbs while the error rate stays flat until the queue itself fills and new requests are rejected. The monitoring signal is a latency spike preceding a queue overflow. In that sequence, a pattern that looks like a sudden degradation event rather than the gradual starvation it is. File descriptor exhaustion surfaces less frequently, but produces a signal that is unfamiliar to teams encountering it for the first time. Operating systems limit the number of files and sockets that can be opened simultaneously across all processes. At that ceiling, no new network connections can be established in any direction. The application cannot connect to dependencies, cannot accept new incoming connections, and cannot write to log files. The error message, "too many open files," is technically accurate and contextually opaque to any team that was not already tracking file descriptor utilization as a monitored metric. Queue exhaustion occurs when the buffer between a message producer and its consumer is fully occupied. A queue that has accepted as many messages as its configured capacity allows will begin rejecting new messages from producers or silently dropping them, depending on the queue's configured overflow behavior. A producer-side application may report no errors at all. The write operation returned a success response even though the message was dropped. Downstream systems stop receiving the work they expected. The failure signal is an absence. Work that should have arrived did not, rather than an error that appears in any error rate graph. The practical difficulty of managing resource exhaustion is that it requires monitoring at the resource layer, not the error layer. Error rate dashboards catch the failure after exhaustion is complete. Resource consumption dashboards, connection pool utilization as a percentage of ceiling, thread pool saturation, queue depth as a fraction of maximum capacity, surface the depletion while it is still in progress and while intervention remains possible. Most standard monitoring setups do not track resource pool consumption as a first-class signal. Application performance monitoring tracks request rates, latency percentiles, and error rates. Infrastructure monitoring tracks CPU, memory, and network throughput. The instrumentation gap between those two layers, how much of each shared resource pool the application is consuming relative to its ceiling, exists only when someone has made a deliberate decision to instrument it and configure alerts against it. That decision is easiest to make during the design of the monitoring system, and most organizations make it after the first exhaustion incident rather than before. The autoscaling coupling requires explicit architectural attention. When an autoscaling policy launches additional instances in response to elevated error rates or latency, and the resource being exhausted is consumed by each instance at startup, the autoscaling response deepens the exhaustion before it relieves it. Designing autoscaling policies that account for resource pool capacity, capping maximum instance count below the resource ceiling, provisioning connection pooling infrastructure that abstracts the database ceiling away from individual application instances, or implementing circuit breakers that prevent new instances from trying to consume a depleted pool, breaks the coupling before a traffic event creates the opportunity to discover it. Pool ceilings also require revision as scale changes. A connection limit that comfortably served 10 application instances may be inadequate for 40. Treating pool configuration as a deployment time decision that does not need to be revisited as the application grows is an assumption that becomes false at a specific moment, and that moment is usually a traffic event. The collaboration platform's failure in April 2020 was not caused by the traffic surge, and it was not caused by the autoscaling system making a mistake. Both behaved as designed. The failure was caused by those two correctly functioning systems interacting with a resource pool that neither system was designed to account for. The autoscaling system scaled up. The database connection ceiling did not. The gap between them emptied the pool. Exhaustion differs from a rate limit exceeded in one essential way. A rate limit exceeded produces an error and a recoverable path within the application. Slow down, implement backoff, wait for the window to reset. Exhaustion produces the same looking error and no recoverable path within the application layer. The resource is gone. The application cannot bring it back. Recovery requires releasing the held resources, expanding the pool ceiling through configuration or instance resizing, or reducing demand below the level the depleted pool can sustain. A resource pool is not a limit you can approach and retreat from. It is a shared asset that empties. When it is empty, everyone waiting for it fails at once. Building for that reality means treating resource pools as things that can be fully consumed under conditions the application is expected to encounter. And designing the monitoring, the pool sizing, and the autoscaling behavior that responds to depletion before production provides the demonstration.